And today we're honoring Black History Month and we want to learn from Maralis about la comunidad latina y luego abrir a la comunidad afrolatina y luego abrir a una conversación entre todos acerca del tema. Bienvenida Maralis Mercado Emerson a nuestras reuniones de Latin 19 y te dejo que comiences y muestras tus slides. Estás muda.
Muy buenas tardes, or yes, good afternoon. I'm Maralis Mercado Emerson. My pronouns are she, hers, ellas. And as Dr. Martinez Bianchi said, I have been at Duke for now 13 years in many different ways, but my heart is always in public health and serving the people. I've been invited to talk and share about the Afro-Latino community because it's near and dear to my heart, but also because I identify as Afro-Latina. So this is part of a project that I have personally been working on in terms of, well, let me start from the beginning. If I can find my present button, that'll work. What can you guys see?
Estamos viendo lo que tú ves. Sí, tenés que poner el otro. If you want slideshow, click slideshow and we should be able to see your slideshow.
Now it's not doing, I got the spilling wheel of death. Okay, so as that does that, this is, why you should know what's on your slides before you do a presentation. And so let me see if I can pull it up another way. And thank you for.
No problem.
I'm going to pull it up another way and we're going to make it work. So as far as presentations are concerned, I am a very vocal person. I love feedback. If there are questions, please interrupt me. Murtado, I promise to try to remember to go as slow as possible so that everybody can get the information that they need. I will preface this by saying that this is not a super academic presentation. I wanted to share a little bit of everything and give folks a foundation of where we as an Afro-Latino community are, both here in the United States, but also abroad. And just really share the reason why I started on this journey and where I have come to so far. Okay, so we can see this, yes? Beautiful. So today we're going to talk about from here and from there. There's a term in Spanish that I used to use a lot and that the elders also use, no soy ni de aquí ni de allá. And in a presentation with Dr. Vincent Guillermo Ramos, he gave me the opportunity to see the positive side and being from here and from there. And so that's the inspiration to this title in terms of growing up as the child of immigrants and not having a space where I felt that I belonged. So I always felt that I wasn't from there and I wasn't from here and I didn't know where I was from. And so I got this question a lot, and I'm sure that there are many people on this phone call that have gotten this question. What are you? And typically first of all, that question is actually really rude. And usually, typically, when we assume good faith, people are just trying to understand what your background is or what your nationality is. And so usually my response is, I'm Afro-Latina, and they're like, what does that mean? And so I used to say, I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican, and they're like, you can be both? And I'm like, okay, we got to start from like the very beginning. And so those of us that are on the call that might have experienced this question, I have personally experienced this many, many times. And in this process have done lots of code switching. And for those of you that don't know what it is that I present differently in certain spaces to be less, so that other people don't feel either as threatened, or I come off less abrasive because they're not comfortable in that space. And so in that, I will share, we did a project, myself and a couple of other folks that I've been doing this work with. And we had the opportunity to just write about, to answer this question. And our task was to create a paragraph or two answering, what are you? And so this is what I came up with. I come from a place where the ocean greets the land with sweet kisses, and the breeze embraces you because it knows you come from fertile ground. My people come from coconut milk and sugar cane, rum and rice, with a little thick on the side. I am yams and yuca, mofongo and mango. My pride keeps me from unleashing the inner fury because I'm afraid of what I'm capable of. Community keeps me humble, and in return, I keep the ancestors on their toes and make God laugh on a regular basis with my plans. And then I am reminded that I am not my fears. If anything, I am relentless. And so this I keep close to me on a regular basis because I get asked, what are you? Or what are you doing? Or who are you? More times than I care to share. So as I said, I am a daughter of immigrants. These are the two humans that created the amazingness that you see before you. My dad is Puerto Rican and my mom is Dominican, and they came to the United States via Florida and had the human being that you see on the left. Isn't she beautiful? And apparently I make carbon copies of myself because all my children look like that baby girl in that picture. So the question that I used to ask myself up until recently, if I'm honest, is, am I enough? And as an Afro-Latina, not fully understanding her identity, what it means, how I am in certain spaces or how I interact in certain spaces, it's very, you question who you are and if you belong. And so growing up in South Florida, for those of you that are from Florida, we know that Florida is not the real South. Florida it's its own special place. And I grew up in South Florida, so I had a very good mixture of what it was to live in the Caribbean. Like my friends were Jamaican and Puerto Rican and Haitian and Dominican and Colombian, and we just had this very extremely diverse group of people. It is north of Latin America. Yes, Miriam, yes, it is. And so when I came to the South and heard my first Southern accent, I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely not from the South, but this is very different, right? And so, in school, you didn't really get a lot of history or Latin American history, and the Black African American history that we got was very limited. So this is what I learned in school or did not learn in school. And so what I did learn in school was that slaves were brought to the United States in cargo ships and the bottom of cargo ships, and that Christopher Columbus was the best thing that ever happened to the Caribbean and Latin America since sliced bread. I knew La Niña, La Pinta, and La Santa Maria before I knew anything else, right? And I will say this, it wasn't until my mid-20s into my 30s that I learned that actually the history that I was taught in school was definitely not the history that was true to our countries, right? And our experience and the experiences of our ancestors and elders. And so this is a transatlantic slave trade. And so you'll notice that there are many people many enslaved people that were brought to Latin America and the Caribbean. There were more people, excuse me, that were brought to Latin America and the Caribbean than there were to the United States, right? And so here there were over 5 million people that were brought into these countries, and actually make up, Black people in these countries make up more than 50% of the population. And so, again, the limited amount of history that we're taught in schools, and as schools are continuing, this is something to think about from a public health perspective and an education perspective, is what is it that we're learning and how are we integrating these things into the practice of our children's understanding of who they are and where they come from and their history. And so not only was I not taught this here in the United States, but also living in Puerto Rico, I didn't get taught this as well, right? I was taught about the Taínos, I was taught about Christopher Columbus, but I was never taught about the enslaved people that were in the country. So here are just depictions of the Taíno peoples in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic. They're not just indigenous to those places, but also then you have the picture of the Spaniards and the Portuguese coming to our islands and our countries, and really decimating the Taino population. They would kill the Indian chiefs, they would impregnate their wives, and then as the slave trade began to progress, because the native people to the islands were being killed off, they started to bring in enslaved people from Africa to, quote unquote, make up for their losses and to be able to work the land. I do have to note the difference between Hispanic and Latino. A lot of us use these interchangeably. And so Hispanic really refers to the language spoken. So that's the Spanish that we're talking about. And Latino includes geography. And so those that are from Latin America, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. So people from Brazil, people from Haiti, all are considered Latino. But they're not considered Hispanic because, for example, in Haiti, you have Creole and French. In Brazil, you have Portuguese. And so here in the United States, they're not considered Hispanic. So who is Afrolatino? Some of us have heard some of these terms: Negro, Garifuna, for those that are from Honduras and Guatemala, Black Latino or Latine. And most recently in Guatemala, they have changed some of their policy where they use the term Afrodescendiente instead of Black Latino or Afrolatino. Or one that my family uses to call me, Morena, is another term that is used to identify darker skinned people. So the top countries that have, the countries with the highest rates of Afro-Latinos are Brazil, Haiti, and the pictures actually are from the different countries: Haiti, Colombia, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Mexico. Mexico, a lot of people don't know that we have these very big Afro or Black communities in our countries. And there are a lot of videos and a lot of conversations that are happening of people coming to the United States. And when they are asked, "Are you Black?" they say, "No, I'm Dominican," or "No, I am Colombian." And that has a lot to do with how Blackness is perceived in our countries, but also how we in the United States identify people in their Blackness. A lot of that has to do with how we present phenotypically, so our skin color, versus how we self-identify. So we've been here. We've existed for a really long time. This is how race and ethnicity is discussed on the census. This is literally how it's asked. The category, we are asked if we're Hispanic or Latino or of Spanish origin, and then we're asked about our race. It wasn't like this before. Before it was the whole notion of being able to identify with the different things of both race and ethnicity was not an option. But in the last census, in the last two census actually, from 2020, from 2010 to 2020, they have updated it so that we can identify as both. But you still have a very large group of people that might identify as Afro-Latino, but not identify as Black, which is a topic of conversation. So this is information from the Pew Institute of Research Center, excuse me. So as far as Afro descendants in Latin America, Brazil, as of 2015, and these numbers have increased. As of 2015, Brazil has the largest population of Afro descendants with 97,000. And if you look at countries like Venezuela, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Mexico, these numbers are huge. I will say that in 2015, a lot of these countries, specifically Dominican Republic and Mexico, were not actually including their Afro descendants in their census. So for example, in Mexico, you have 14 million Afro descendants in cities that are completely Afro-Latinos or Black, but they were not being counted for. And so that's not new to a lot of our countries. And there's also a lot of policy in some of our countries that limit who and how are a part of the decision-making processes, very similar to the United States, and how they're involved and where they live. So you have some countries that had Afro descendants and had very thriving Black communities, and they are either non-existent or very small now because of the policies that past presidents have put into place that have really harmed Black communities in our countries. Oh, excuse me. So like I said, how Afro-Latinos report their race, 39% of them report that they're white, and only 18% have reported that they are Black. There are over a quarter of the US of Hispanic Latinos. So we account for, as far as Hispanic Latinos, we account for now 16% of the population as far as the minoritized population. We are the largest minoritized populations. We are the largest minoritized population in the United States. Of those, 73% are not Latino and not Afro-Latino, and 24% identify as Afro-Latino. As far as the experiences of Afro-Latinos here in the United States, Afro-Latinos are more likely than other Latinos to experience things like being stopped by the police or being discriminated against. We have higher rates of discrimination. We experience discrimination by someone who identifies as Hispanic, and also been called offensive names. So for some of us, being called mulata is not nice, or being called pardo is not okay. They're not terms of endearment or de cariño, but are actually really offensive terms. People have acted, this has actually happened to me, people have acted as if you're not smart, to the point where I refused to let people know that I actually spoke Spanish because I didn't want to be perceived as not educated because of where I was growing up. Or vice versa, my Spanish wasn't good enough. So when I lived in Puerto Rico, again, that experience of like, why do you talk like that? Why do you say things like that? Was very real. And then knowing that Hispanics with darker skin are more likely to experience discrimination than those with lighter skin. That's very much true here in the United States, including those that some of us may have cousins, or we know someone that they are darker than I am and say they're not Black. But if told, or if asked if someone were to identify them, they would probably put them in either a mixed or a Black race distinction, right? My rule of thumb is if the police were to pull you over, are they going to treat you like a white person, or are they going to treat you like a Black person? And typically when I'm having that conversation with folks, they start to understand that you're actually not white here in the United States, you're an other. And that's very hard for a lot of folks to swallow. For Latinos, skin color shapes life experiences. So we know that darker skinned people, not, yes, Lisa, we've had this many times, we've had this conversation. Having darker skin hurts Latinos' ability to get ahead. Skin color shapes our daily life experiences and how we interact. Discrimination based on race or skin color is a very big problem. Things as simple as our names, not just similar to the African American community. There have been actual reports of people changing their names on their resumes, and they get phone calls versus putting their given name on the resume, like Jose Martinez, and then they just put Joe Martinez, and they got the phone calls with Joe Martinez, but not with the Jose Martinez. My name is Maralis, and I can't tell you how many times I have been called Maralis, Marcellus, Martinez. Like it's a laundry list. And I'm like, if you can say Schwarzenegger, you can say Maralis, right? and understanding that our names are directly linked for many of us to ancestors and elders and what that means, but also how we interact in the world. Sometimes has our skin color, just our skin color has been an effect, similar to our African American brothers and sisters. Afro-Latinos are more likely than other Latinos to talk with family members about these challenges. So the percentage is about 39%. So having those similar conversations of like where you're out in the street, you need to be safe. And what does safety look like? Who do you go to? You're a brown Black person. What does that mean for you here in the United States? Or what does that mean for you in your country? And how do we keep each other safe? And so, you know, I'm the mother of 3 Black, brown boys in a country that does not like Black, brown people, or at least doesn't show a lot of love to them. Most recently, there was a middle school child, Black child, thrown onto the ground by a white police officer. How do I explain that to my son who's brown? And so these are conversations that we're having at a young age, similar to other our melanated brothers and sisters that we have to have, that our white Latinos don't need to have these conversations. So, excuse me, this study, I wanted to include some academic stuff, right? And so this is by Dr. Pereira from right down the street in the light blue, who's done some really amazing work as far as health and skin color and access and what that means to folks. And so in this first, on the left-hand side, they asked folks as far to self-identify their race and ethnicity. The interviewer identified the person, and then they looked at their skin color, and we wrote the things down. And so the first one is skin color. They went from very light skin. Some of us may call that, some of us may call that white passing. I call it white to dark, very dark skin. And so 72% of them were very light skinned to 67% being dark skin. And I will say this, I was yesterday years old when I realized that the word trigueña, which is very much utilized in our countries, meant wheat, like wheat colored. I was like, what? Everybody always called me that, trigueña this, trigueña that. And I'm like, okay. And I accepted it. And no one ever explained it to me. And it wasn't until yesterday where I was finalizing my notes and I was like, wait a minute, this actually means wheat colored. So even in our countries, the titles that we give to our skin, like trigueña and jabao or mulata or mestizo, all have secondary meanings that many of us still do not understand or identify with. Right, trigo. Took me forever to figure that one out. So then the interviewer ascribed their race and ethnicity to the participant. 70% were very light to 72% being dark. And then there's self-reported race. So you see that like as far as the skin color, how the skin color to the self-reported race are really are close in number in terms of how folks identify. But for me, what was interesting about this research was how folks with very light skin had more education, higher levels of wealth, did not experience colorism or color discrimination, and had lower rates of class discrimination compared to their more melanated counterparts. What does that sound like? That sounds very much how we experience it here in the United States. And so really thinking about how socioeconomic status has an impact, access to education has been impacted, access to health is impacted, or not just access to health, but how we navigate the healthcare system, right? So we have higher maternal morbidity, morbidity and mortality rates compared to our white counterparts. African-American women are very, very high. Yes, the Pereira study was that they looked at 4 different countries: Brazil, Panama, Dominican Republic, and Cuba, if I'm not mistaken. And then they looked at some here as well as in the United States, to answer your question in the chat. And so really thinking about how when we're out in the community doing outreach, and here in Durham, there is an Afro-Latino community, but it's not as big as, for example, the indigenous community here in Durham, right? But we exist. And so how do we navigate these spaces, whether it's through DPS, for example, or the healthcare system, or the penal system, so police and judges and so on and so forth, are very similar to those folks in the African American community. So the scholarly work that has taken place in the Afro-Latino community is not new. There's a whole library in New York that was founded by Arturo Schomburg, who is an Afro-Puerto Rican individual that during the Harlem Renaissance really started to just take in as much information as he possibly could, and created the first library dedicated to Black history and Black knowledge. You have organizations like the Young Lords, who were dedicated to just the advancement of the Hispanic Latino community, but many of them also identified as Afro-Latino, and were actually modeled off and supported by the Black Panthers. Researchers like Miriam Jimenez Roman, who started the Afro-Latino project. Unfortunately, we lost her to cancer in 2020, but her work as far as the Afro-Latino project and the Afro-Latino reader has been instrumental to my work and my research in terms of my own Afro-Latinidad. And then you have Dr. Vega. Oops, sorry. And Duke's very own Dr. Agardo. And so these are folks that are doing scholarly work and communal work that a lot of people actually don't know about. These are organizations here in the United States and abroad that are working specifically on Afro-Latinidad and different caucuses that are involved with. I'm personally involved with the Reforma Afro-Latina Affinity Group, but there are also other organizations that do this work that are not just doing communal work, but they're also doing research and collaborations and conferences. There are whole conferences and a whole and days dedicated to Afro-Latinidad that are international. So you have the International Day de Afrolatinidad that are celebrated throughout the world. So these are just a few of my favorite books that have influenced and continue to influence my research as I continue to gather information and history for my sons so that I can pass down this information. Honestly, this was the catalyst. My sons were the catalyst for me starting to really dig into my own history and understanding just where I come from and who were my ancestors and understanding my elders. Because I wanted to be able to give them this information that was not given to me. And so these are 8 of my favorite books. Right now, I'm currently working through the African American and Latinx history of the United States. And it's really good. The Afro-Latino reader has some really great, I don't want to say speeches and things, stories. That's the word I'm looking for. Stories of Afro-Latinos that are really going into their culture. If you're into poetry, Manteca is fantastic. But I wanted to share these because, again, a lot of people are not privy to like these books and these resources exist, right? These things are here. You might not have even heard of half of these authors, but we're here and we're doing good work, and we're contributing, right, to the work that's being done not only in research, in academia, in medicine, in education. We've been a part of it for some time. Perla is a project that's based out of Princeton that really looks at race and ethnicity in Latin America. They have a few research articles right now that are out, and I've included some citations for folks to be able to access that. And here are the wonderful citations that I have used for these presentations, but also that I keep a running tab of some of the things that as I research, I keep tabs of the research, the journal articles and the books and such that I keep on tabs so I can share with other people. So that's just my Afro-Latino history, my personal Afro-Latino history that I'm happy to share with everyone.